Hi, Michelle Glass here. Welcome to our final episode of Chapter 15. This is a short one. We're just picking out a little bit of information about those tracts, looking at the connections between the body and the spinal cord and the brain. This time we're looking at descending tracts. So descending tracts are going to be bundles of myelinated axons that are carrying the same kind of type of information, going in the same direction, this time down, and at about the same speed. So obviously, if we're going from the brain to the spinal cord and out to the body, we are carrying here motor information. So we're going to be focusing on the somatic division. So in each one of these tracts that we're going to be talking about, our final effector tissue will be skeletal muscle. Now, just like with ascending tracts, we need to pay attention to where the processing center is located. So it's somewhere in the brain. We need to pay attention to the type of information traveling, which is going to be the same for all descending tracts. We're going to be looking at the control of skeletal muscle. And the third thing is to pay attention to decussation. Where does crossover happen? Okay, so let us start with the lateral corticospinal pathway. Now here the term corticospinal is talking about the primary the primary motor cortex in the brain, and then spinal is, of course, down the spinal cord. So the name right there should automatically clue you in that we're looking at a descending tract. Okay, so we have, in this case, an upper motor neuron, which is housed in the primary motor cortex. Primary motor cortex is located in the precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe. So we are located here in the cerebrum, so this is conscious control. Notice that it travels down the same side, notice that it decussates at the brain stem and travels down where it synapses onto the lower motor neuron. The lower motor neuron is the one that is leaving the spinal cord and then synapsing onto the skeletal muscle. So in ascending tracts, we had first, second, and third order neurons, and in descending tracts, we have upper and lower motor neurons. So it's a little bit simpler nomenclature. The anterior corticospinal pathway is very similar. So again, we're going to be starting in that primary motor cortex and extending down the spinal cord. So here we see that the upper motor neuron, which again is housed in the primary motor cortex, is traveling down the same side. When it gets to that part of the spinal cord, that's where decussation occurs, and then it's synapsing onto the lower motor neuron. So the key difference between the lateral and anterior corticospinal pathways is where decussation occurs. Next, let's take a look at what's called the medial pathway. The medial pathway is going to actually modify the signal to skeletal muscle in the neck, the trunk, and the proximal limbs. So that's going to be like arms. Notice that the medial pathway has its upper neuron in the midbrain. So now we're in the brain stem. So this is unconscious modification on that lower motor neuron, changing the way that our body is moving. We have another one called the lateral pathway, and this time we're going to modify muscle for muscle tone and precise movement of our distal limbs, so legs. And we can have the same basic picture. So the lateral pathway is located, its upper motor neuron is located in the midbrain. So this is unconscious regulation, and it's synapsing on those same groups of lower motor neurons that are synapsing onto the skeletal muscle. So even though we talk about skeletal muscle as being consciously controlled, there is definitely an unconscious component as well. But we see that you have a group of conscious neurons coming from the primary motor cortex, or a group of unconscious sort of neurons coming from the brain stem, synapsing onto the same lower motor neuron. Okay, and that's it.